Les demoiselles d'Avignon, originally named the Brothel of Avignon, represents 5 Barcelonese prostitutes of the Avignon street in the Gothic quarter. Its name was changed during an exhibition organized by the French art critic and writer André Salmon in 1916. At the show, Salmon referred to the painting by its current name so as not to reveal the scandalous subject of the work to the public. As a broad overview, it was painted in 1907, a time when the artist was living the bohemian lifestyle of Paris, Barcelona, and Madrid, and became the first real example of the Cubist movement that he and his buddy George Braque would work on and expand in the years to follow. But every single masterpiece that we know today has an origin story. This work, the Harem, is one of the most direct antecedents of Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. It is the most important work of those painted by Picasso in the period called Pink Classicism in the year of 1906. Picasso abandons the sensuality and sumptuousness of bodies to convey let's say, a more sordid atmosphere. In the foreground, we find a lame eunuch with a jug in his left hand, while in the background there is the procurer. In the center are the women washing and combing their hair, in tune with some of the gas works. When we have a lesson on Impressionism, we will see some more of these examples of Degas painting bathers. The roots of this theme, La Toilette, and Picasso's inspiration for representing women in intimacy, comes from the Turkish bath by Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, painted in 1862, and the bather by the same author many years before in 1808. Ingres cultivated Orientalism above all through his numerous female nudes. His paintings are dominated by an unreal sense of exoticism typical of the 18th century and presented a perfect beauty with sinuous curves and purity of form. You may be familiar also with Man Ray's version of 1924, The Violin of Ingres, made during the Dadaist movement, but that's another story. So let's jump ahead to a third inspiration for our Spaniard, The Card Players by Paul Cézanne. Painted in 1895, it is the last one of 5 versions, where he distorts perspective, simplifies the forms, and uses a faceting technique to break up contours that all the cubists will be using 15 years later. Cézanne once said, "Everything in nature is formed upon the sphere, the cone, and the cylinder. One must learn to paint these simple figures, and then one can do all that he may wish." In response to this, Picasso said, "Cézanne is the father of us all." There is yet another artist that inspired Picasso to work tirelessly towards Les Demoiselles, and that is his frenemy Henri Matisse. It was in the salon of Gertrude and Leo Stein that the master of modern art, Matisse, then aged 37, and the 25-year-old Picasso would meet. They were meant to collide, two opposing forces, really. Matisse thought art was a matter of harmony and poetry. For Picasso, painting had to be a shock for the viewer. Matisse, on one hand, spoke down to Picasso, as he was not only a more experienced artist, but also an intellectual. Picasso trusted his own abilities to change the world of art, and didn't enjoy being largely unknown. Even more terrible for the competitive soul that was Pablo, the Steins bought and exhibited Matisse's major work, Joy of Life, finished in 1905. It is an imaginary landscape inspired by Persian miniatures, Japanese woodcuts, and Titian's Bacchanal. It was a massive painting with shocking colors, linear figures, and a clear rejection of classical perspective and proportion. As other folk works by Matisse, it is vastly expressive in its colors and sordid theme. Too much for Picasso to take, so much so that he would say, "People think Matisse is the first of the modern painters, but not at all. He is the last of the classical painters," implying that he was the first of the modern movement. He then shut himself in his studio for months in order to produce the oeuvre that would crush Matisse's Joy of Life. For that effect, Picasso produced hundreds of preparatory sketches in diverse techniques, from pencil to charcoal and watercolor. In these first drafts, Les Demoiselles had 7 figures, 2 of which were men, one a medicine student, the other a sailor, so a more classical brothel scene. The concept then evolved as the artist made several changes during the planning process. Most evidently, the change in characters, where he would end up having 5 figures and all of them women. He also experimented with the poses and body composition and would introduce the concepts that would later on become a sort of manifesto of the movement, that the composition, simplification, analysis, and reconstruction of the parts, and in general, the dissolution of the form. From the very first sketches, we can see a crouched figure represented from two different perspectives. Also, a mask-like face, and three other standing figures, stylized but still recognizable. 5 women, 5 different expressions and styles. It's been said this is probably a reflection of the artist going through the same transition and metamorphosis. Along with this inspiration, we can see Fernand Olivier, his longtime model and lover at the moment this painting was created. This relationship would last 7 years, and it would be while living with her that Picasso started what is now known as his pink period. The artist himself would admit years later that one of the ladies of Avignon was inspired in Fernand. Now, Joy of Life was not the only piece of Matisse that shocked Picasso. The French artist had also produced and exhibited in 1907 his first Blue Nude, Souvenir of Biskra, inspired by his great collection of African masks and sculptures and departing from one of the figures in Joy of Life. In this piece, the body is accentuated by the deep shadows beyond and an almost disproportionate body, limbs forming hard angles and broken lines. So the torsion creates tension and movement and expression. And you can see that Braque was also greatly inspired because he made something quite similar a year later. You can see it above. We've seen till now that Picasso was always clear and transparent about who and what inspired him. It was, after all, him who said, "Bad artists copy, good artists steal." And we know what he meant about that. He meant taking things from other geniuses and transforming it into something completely new. In this case, one of the sculptors of the post-impressionist Paul Gauguin is savage, in air quotes, of form and color, who opposed the bourgeois aesthetic and who created some of the most audacious art of the end of the 19th century. He would die 4 years before the ladies were created, but became popular after Umbrella Bollard, Picasso's agent, exhibited his art in Paris in the turn of the century. Picasso first encountered primitive art, again in air quotes, in Matisse's studio and at the Ethnographic Museum exhibition in Trocadero. The primitive idols, statues, and masks freed him from the need of joining the parts. They could be understood as independent figures, and they embodied the mighty forces of nature. Similar to this, he was also captivated by Romantic art, which he came to know in Spain. It was within the realms of history that he understood and demystified the origins of Occidental art. Our fifth invited artist, El Greco, with his Vision of Apocalypse of 1614. The Souls of the Martyrs in pure expressionist style that would anticipate young Picasso by only 300 years. If we compare the pieces, there is an evident relation. Nude figures in the central part, the intense atmosphere, and the elongated figures in sharp angularity. El Greco would not be the only master that would serve as inspiration. Picasso attended the Royal Academy of Arts of San Fernando in Madrid many years before this story takes place, but only briefly, preferring to roam the art exhibits of El Prado, studying paintings of Rembrandt, El Greco, Francisco de Goya, and Diego Velázquez. Last but not least, the Great Bathers of Cézanne of 1906, the biggest canvas ever created by the artist. A reduced set of colors, a theme that he had represented many times before, but this time the bathers are framed by two sets of trees, inclined as to form a vault above the characters. This masterpiece will influence profoundly the protagonists of the avant-garde to come and announces already what will be known as Cubism. Although it was completed in the summer of 1907, Picasso kept the ladies of Avignon in the Montmartre studio until 1916. During this time, only a select number of people were invited to visit and see the painting, including the artist's circle of close friends, artists, and art dealers. And the response was mixed. Even Braque was worried and horrified. He told Picasso that looking at the painting was like drinking gasoline or eating an old rope. Matisse hated it, saying it was a mockery of modern art, but he would later on find inspiration in it. The critic Hilton Kramer would state, "After the ladies, never again was Matisse mistaken for an avant-garde artist." And what about you? Do you love Picasso? Do you hate his ladies? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this little story, consider joining me in Patreon, Art History Lessons for the Creative Mind Who Wants to Be Inspired. From the price of a coffee, you can help me grow this channel and feature more artists, masterpieces, and thoughts for a more creative and mindful practice. Thank you.